Hi, I'm Adrian Strittmatter. Welcome to Bricks and More. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SAENTYS, a global creative consultancy specializing in destinations, real estate, and the hospitality sector. Bricks and More is all about exploring how to generate, unlock, and maximize real estate value. Our mission is to challenge outdated and limiting notions of how this is done. In each episode, we talk to top professionals to uncover innovative strategies that drive short, medium, and long-term gains. So if you're passionate about making real estate more valuable for more people, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bricks and More. Branded residences aren't just about prestige. They're also about performance, asset management, experience, seamless operations, and long-term value. But what does it take to really deliver a development that lives up to the name and justifies the premium? So in this episode of Bricks and More, we're asking all the big questions. What role does a global brand like Four Seasons play in shaping value across a project's lifecycle? How can developers, investors, and operators get branding right from day one and decades on? Today's guest is James Price, a global expert in branded residential real estate. Now part of the corporate residential team at Four Seasons, James advises on everything from pricing and design to amenities and homeowner structures, ensuring every Four Seasons residences delivers exceptional value and experience. His insight is grounded in more than 20 years of international experience, including over a decade leading the international residential development team at Knight Frank across EMEA, the US, and the Caribbean. James, welcome to Bricks and More.
Thank you, Adrian. Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's always a great joy when someone accepts an invitation to come to the podcast. So, really happy.
I have to accept the one or two I get.
Yeah, well, I know. Thankfully, we've got it off the ground. What is it that drew you to real estate and sort of hospitality or residential real estate in the first place?
So I think one of the first jobs I had when I came out of university was actually working for a golf company who developed golf courses and golf academies. Mm-hmm. We had a link up with the player group. And we were setting up academies around Europe and stuff. So the travel bit of it, I got a bit of a bug for working that would give you an opportunity just to go and see other places. And then as part of that, those memberships that I was selling had an investment base to them. So I had to become stock market registered and do my exams and everything. So did all that. And I thought, well, this will be the city then after this. And so that's where I thought I was going. But I kind of realized actually I'd prefer to be in something which feels a little bit more tangible and has more common experience for people. So I actually worked in high street agency in London for a few years with a couple of different companies and just got that property bug. And I've always just enjoyed it. And then there was an opportunity that came up at Knight Frank to sort of go into their international team. So putting those two things together.
Back to travel again.
Back to travel. Yeah. The glamour of the sort of Stansted, Ryanair, first thing in the morning, get out to Italy.
Can't beat it.
Perfect.
Can't beat it.
But it was great. And we had a great network of people we worked with in the countries that I was sort of overseeing. So that was a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed that. And Knight Frank were a great team. And I felt in a good spot there. And then we started to develop a sort of development consultancy business for overseas projects, residential projects. So I headed up that team and again, did a lot more consultancy work and understanding more about sort of the development program and the economics of it all and what drives value, I suppose, in properties and with the essential ingredients that you need to build something to be successful in the long term. So it was very interesting seeing it from that end. And a couple of the projects I was working on there were Four Seasons branded projects. So the property in Madrid that we opened a few years ago, we had a property in Florence that we were working on, and a couple of others. And I got to know the Four Seasons team. And so I was with Knight Frank for 13 years, so a long time. And again, great international business. I had one boss the whole time there, Paddy, who was great. So it was a bit of a wrench leap, but that Four Seasons opportunity came up when I started to work on those projects. I got to know what were then became my bosses and transitioned across. And it's just been sort of onwards from there, really. And taking, and again, it's a slightly different role that we have as the brand in this. We're going to be operating these properties. So we have a different kind of role and a sort of different sort of stakeholder position, if you like, within the whole thing. So we're still not the developer ourselves, but we heavily influence the process. And obviously being the brand that we are, we have to make sure that the right quality assurances and the promises that we make and that the developers make when they're selling our properties to would-be buyers. We have to make sure that everything's in place to fulfill those. So yeah, that was the kind of the route through into property, really. So it started from very left field beginnings, but yeah.
There's a coherence there, at least.
I think so. Chopping and changing as I go along. What's coming tomorrow? Who knows? But
we'll see.
Yeah.
In terms of, you mentioned something, and as Bricks and More is all about how do we measure and unlock value, and you mentioned it very briefly there. But in terms of value creation, what would you say the levers are that are consistently coming back all the time?
So I think we're often asked where the value is and how do you get to that value. And a lot of the studies that you see in the branded residential world and a lot of the players that are coming into the sector, which seems to be growing, all kind of assume we're going to get a brand premium of X. The reality is that you're one part of the equation. So it's a sort of building up a layer cake, if you like, of different elements. And of course, real estate starts with location. Yeah. I always remember a gentleman called Patrick Ramsey at Knight Frank, who said, you make sure you got the best instructions and the best locations because, when the tide rises and the market gets tighter, if you've got the high ground, you're always going to be okay. And it always stuck with me. Yeah. And so I think the focus and we're now pretty laser focused and strategic about where we want to be. These have got to be the best locations, and within those locations, finding the best sites. Then the next level to it is obviously the architecture, ensuring that you've got something which is generally going to stand out as a landmark property, which people are going to feel a clear pride of ownership in, and which will have all of the sort of amenities and facilities and design elements that need to make a buyer feel, okay, this is something different. This is genuinely best in class, and I know what I'm getting here. So I think that those elements are important. And then we think in particular about creating a sense of community in our properties. So whether it be an urban property, it could be mixed use, where typically you've got a hotel and then the residential stacked above it. Or increasingly, we're doing a lot of standalone properties which are not linked to hotels. So they're just outright residences. And those is
what
the same approach.
The percentage that you currently have of the mix, hotel, resi, or just independent resi, what would you say it is at the moment?
So the standalone business is something which is more recent. So we've got a few flagship properties, as we'd say. So 20 Grosvenor Square was one of the first ones for us. We've got properties in LA. We've got one in Dubai, another one in development in San Francisco. We've got properties now coming on the sort of east coast in the States, DC, and then Miami. We've got standalone. So, again, it's hitting those right markets, but it's a growing bit for us. So we do see the opportunity for accelerated growth in the standalone area because not all locations are relevant for hotels, but there are a lot of top-end residential locations that would work for us. So that growth is clearly marked for us there. But there's still a huge amount of mixed-use properties in our pipeline. Developers, ultimately, if they want to build a Four Seasons hotel and have that running for however long they hold on to it, the economics of it stack much more easily if you've got residential that you can sell. We have 57 properties around the world that are now open and operating. Of those, I think we have 7 or 8 which are standalone properties. Okay. And the pipeline going forward, we are at least doubling already with agreed contracts on new standalone properties, that number for the next 5 years. Oh, wow. And then we have probably about 30 other properties, which we're expecting to come to fruition in the next 5 years. The ratio of standalone to mixed use is gradually increasing as we focus on that business, but it's still very broad. And then we have properties which are urban, as I was saying, then properties which are resorts, which work a little bit differently. So in our urban properties, we generally wouldn't have transient rental programs because people that are buying those, they're buying it as a very exclusive, private sort of home. Often it's their primary residence. So they don't want to have James Price pitching up with his overnight bag and getting in the same lift with them. But in the resort properties, it's much more by nature of these things. It's more holidays, it's second homes and stuff. So in those, we do operate rental programs. And we're probably about 60% urban, 40% resort at the moment. So we want to keep a good balance. I know some other brands are tending to focus a little bit more on urban because it's a kind of, often those markets are a little bit more liquid. They're perhaps easier to sell if you're in the right spot. But the resort properties, they enhance the positioning of us being a lifestyle brand. And also it does open up opportunities for the rentals, which have become hugely successful for us in the last few years. We want to keep it fairly balanced in that way.
From a brand perspective, you're talking across wide range of different geographies. Would you say that Four Seasons is now globally recognized and globally recognized in the same way in different locations?
Yeah, so I think that in the branded sector, it obviously took roots
Mm.
in the Americas first and foremost. So we still have a huge number of properties there, and the pipeline is still
Hmm.
very strong there. Geographically, though, I think that it is evened out. So
Hmm.
Middle East is a very active area for us. Europe, we're seeing much more opportunity come in, particularly around resorts. And then APAC has also been a strong market for us historically, and
Hmm.
continues to be a market where there are, again, a huge amount of opportunity for us. So I think that it is genuinely a global footprint. And I think that the more we build that number of properties, as I say, we're close to 60, which by the end of
Mm.
this year, we should have 60 properties open and operating. People recognize that value proposition. And also, this year is going to be the 40th year in which we've worked in the residential space. Our first property, which we opened, was in Boston in
Oh.
1985. That length of tenure that we've had looking
Hmm.
after high net worths who demand the very best, it builds up a very solid understanding of what people are looking for. And that is not just operationally what we do for them, but back to the original kind of design phase and knowing that we're creating buildings which are going to answer their needs.
Mm.
So I think that sort of those deep roots that we have and the fact that those roots are spread over broader areas now is important for us. So I think when you look at studies of the branded resi sector as a single brand, Four Seasons is still leading the way. And we
Hmm.
feel that not just in terms of the number of properties that we've got, but the quality of locations that we're in. And also, you just look at the team behind it that's delivering. We've now got a very sizable residential business with a lot of dedicated experts who come out of a residential
Mm.
background. They don't come out of a hotel background. And careers in the residential business for us are important now. And I think that more broadly across the wider Four Seasons world, people do see that as a strong career path for them. So I think that we've got that bench strength, if you like, where we're
Hmm.
coming into projects and we have the resource to put in play to make sure that we uphold the brand qualities and values. I think you look at the wider sector and you just look at some of the brands that are coming into it, and you think not
Hmm.
only do you really not have any experience in this space to bring in, and that's fine, people will grow
Hmm.
experience, but you also just wonder what is the value proposition
Mm.
for buyers and a lot of these other brands without going into naming any. I just think that some of them are
No
kind of
naming.
a somewhat ethereal connection to the or
Yeah.
tenuous connection
Mm.
to the proposition of living and being looked after and having your home looked after. And so I think that we'll see how it plays out, but I
Mm.
think buyers will start to scrutinize this sector and ask what they're getting from the brands.
Mm.
I think with the leading hospitality brands, it's pretty clear that you're bringing in that sort of hospitality service DNA, call it what you will. And I think that we like to think that we still lead the way in that respect. We also, I think, make a virtue of the fact, and it's quite distinct from a lot of the other brands, even the hospitality
Mhm.
brands who maybe have third parties that ultimately will come in and help manage those
Manage
properties.
and operate, yeah.
We actually do all the property management.
Mm.
So it's Four Seasons people that are coming into these properties and looking after you and looking after your home. So it's not just about the front of house services that you see, but it's also about the managing of the assets when it comes to capital programming, making
Mhm.
sure that the building is maintained and that asset value is protected as best you
Mhm.
can. That all comes from years of understanding how we do that around hotels. And so we bring that space in, and it just means that if you're an owner of somewhere, you know that when you go there, you're going to have a fantastic time and every need is going to be
Mm.
looked after. But when you're not there, you've got a professional team that is highly competent who is looking after that asset for you. And I think that's a big
Mm.
driver for high net worths. And so, whilst there are others that do a bit of management, and there are other management companies that do a great job,
Mhm.
for sure. I think that it's very clear when you're buying with Four Seasons, you know you're going to get Four Seasons looking after you for
Mhm.
decades to come.
When we were doing the preamble sort of call, I found that extremely interesting. There was that first notion of beyond the logo and beyond the sort of looking after you, the person, the sort of the purchaser, but also looking after the property. And I think that notion was really clear. Would you be able to take us through the kind of Four Seasons way across the sort of development cycle? How do you ensure that guarantee, that USP, as you said, that it's really Four Seasons from start to finish?
So I think it would start with the initial kind of feasibility and assessment of
Hmm.
projects. So again, we're not the owners of the projects, we're the brand
Yep.
and the operator that's been brought in. But right from the outset of a new opportunity coming our way, we'll run an internal assessment. Often we get third party market reports that we have a series of very good people in the market that provide those. And we will look at those and make sure that what is being proposed to be developed actually fits the market and is going to push the market. So we want to be at the top of every market that we're in. So we have to feel that we've got a developer that shares the vision, that there is a good capital stack behind it, that they're going to be able to see this thing through. And so that initial feasibility is an important part of it. And we've got a couple of guys in my team who specialize in that. They came out of the Savills business. And so we run a fine rule over that and make sure that at just the very outset, we're not going down the wrong path.
So you do refuse projects then?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're always very delighted to be, courted or have things put our way. But as I said earlier, we've got a very clear strategic view as to where we want to be, and within certain locations that will help define what we're looking at or not. And then the scale of properties is important for us. Essentially, when we are looking at projects, we have to feel, as I said, there's an opportunity to create a genuine community there. So we need scalability. Plus, to be best in market, you now have to have a lot of amenity program and common areas. We have to deliver a lot of back of house areas so that we can deliver that service standard. Again, when you're looking at an area program, you might have a certain amount of sort of square meters overall, but you've got to net that down to what's sellable because you've got to have the engine that drives all of that. The scale is a key thing for us to determine as well, whether it's something we can do.
No-go kind of thing.
And also there are things like certain markets we may not be able to directly be the property manager. So that's an important thing for us. If we can't ultimately manage that for whatever licensing reasons or whatever, we're not going to go forward with it because, again, the long-term experience that we deliver is what protects the brand.
Yeah,
exactly.
You're in it for the long term, whatever happens.
And
with
we're
the developer,
starting
the
to
investors,
measure that now. And I'm digressing from the question, but we're starting to measure that a little bit more now because we've got projects that we've been on for sort of 40 years. I'll range there. There are projects which are obviously getting older, and so the maintenance of those properties and the value. When you look at resales that are happening, and we don't have a huge turnover in our portfolio. People tend to hold on to them for a long time. It's maybe 3.5% turnover across the portfolio each year. But within that, we can track where the resales values are and how that stacks against other properties in the market at that time. And it's a strong story. And I think that again, means that we can tell that story to buyers saying you are going to be looked after. And nobody can guarantee an asset value, of course, but we will make sure that you've got the best means in place to protect it. So anyway, back to the question, it starts with that initial kind of feasibility.
You said yes.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
So when we go forward, then there's a lot of legal work. Obviously, all our management agreements need to be agreed. We need to go through the governing documents, which are a critical part of a project getting set up. So parking all of the design work, parking all of the marketing preparation. Buyers need to know how this thing's going to work for them. So what is the entity that's going to be set up as a homeowner association? What voting rights do they have? If it's mixed use, what rights of access do they have to the hotel or resort? Is there a rental program? What are the bylaws? And so all of that detail is critical. And that can take 6 months to work through because if you get any of that wrong, you're just going to be compromising potentially the ultimate experience that you have. So, as I say, we rely on the experience within the team now, where they really are, they look at the nuts and bolts of this, and it's a little bit like making a watch. You have to get into the detail. And again, when we roll out those governing documents, we then put in place a sort of a labor plan. We have an operating model, which has commonality across all projects. Of course, we want to deliver that 4-season standard, but every project is unique. So we'll build that up, and then we end up building up a budget. So the service charge that buyers are going to have to pay each year.
That's going to be important.
And it's always the case that the capital values, even though they may be super high, that's not the issue. It's more what it's going to cost me each year. And so and buyers will drill into that, and they want to understand what that includes, what they're getting for it. So we're looking at the staffing numbers and the different roles and what they do. And then, as I said, on the amenity program, those are incredible amenities to have, pool. There's so much wellness and stuff that goes on now, but it might be things like we do a lot of multi-purpose rooms where people can hire out these spaces, but they can also be used for ongoing meeting rooms or other entertainment purposes. But each one of those, even if they're not serviced all day long, they carry a maintenance cost to them. So those common areas all stack up to a cost, and that cost has to be shared amongst the homeowners. So that's why you need to have scale. So if you're building a world-class amenity program, you've got to have sufficient scale to spread those costs among the homeowners. As I say, it is a science, and this is a part of the business that I didn't really understand when I was, even when I was consulting on it at Knight Frank. You had a bit of a sense of, okay, let's look at the service charges, let's benchmark them. How do they compare to other properties? But you really have to understand the nuance of what goes into all of building that up.
So the consumer insights start really early on when you're defining the product.
Yes.
And defining even the legal structure of the 100%.
Purchase. So we want to understand what's the buyer profile. And you've got guesstimates around it. You can, but it changes. But I think that there is a sense in many markets where you put a big brand on it, you're going to be drawing an international audience. And the reality is that probably 80% of your market is the top end of the local market. And yes, you'll get some international buyers. There are certain markets where it's a bit more international driven and that it is genuinely a kind of a broad church of people you've got coming in. But that also informs the sort of the sales strategy. And again, that sits with the developer and their marketing agent or the sales agent that they've brought on board. We work very closely with them. Obviously, we provide a lot of sort of brand guidance to them in terms of how they set up a project and how they deliver all the marketing materials, the website, brochures, etc. that carries our brand. We clearly
very involved
in that. But the sales strategy is something that we also weave into. And we have our own channels now that we will switch on for a project when it goes live. So we have a database of people. Obviously, we've got a website. We have the Four Seasons magazine. We help a lot with PR and so on and so forth. So there's a lot that Four Seasons brings to it. And we generate increasingly well-qualified leads for our development partners. So I think that it's a full effort across all of that way. And we want to work very closely with the development partner. It's not just about giving them the brand and they go away and do what they want.
Yeah.
And
some do that.
I just don't think they've got the resource and they don't have the expertise to be able to do anything other than just here's a brand agreement. Now, developer, you go off and do what you want with it. It's not the way that we work, and that's all to the long term good of the project. And as I said, it comes back to developers having a shared vision with us. We're very lucky that we've got some great owner partners who have a number of projects and own maybe multiple hotels. They've done a number of residential projects with us. So that shared vision and understanding what the quality is that we need to deliver is just a lot easier development program if you've got the same outlook on board.
So talking about the investors, do the investors sometimes once the project's delivered, do they exit and then a new investor comes in? How do you make sure that that kind of shared partnership still works when that happens?
Sure. So I think in the mixed-use projects, generally the owners of the property who have developed the hotel and the residences and sold the residences off, they're staying in as the hotel owner. So, they are in for the long term. Now, of course, there are different types of ownership groups. Some maybe have a different strategy where they're going to then sell that asset on once it's established and stuff. And that's fine. And then you've got the standalone properties where it is just the homeowners. But in any event, the way that it's set up is that we're agreeing all those governing documents and the management agreements with the developer to then go and sell those properties. Once the homeowner association is established and the developers sold out of their units, then those agreements innovate towards the homeowner association. So they're effectively then employing Four Seasons to look after them.
Manage and run and look after them.
But everything is set up with the developer at the outset. So a buyer now, the buyers are obviously very sophisticated and they know what quality looks like. So from a standpoint of looking at design and quality of finishes and craftsmanship and everything, we have a huge design services team which is laser focused on delivering that. And then we want to make sure that experience that those buyers have is fulfilling the promise that was made to them at the sales table. So they're very sophisticated. They know what to look for. They understand service charges generally. They understand the services that they're going to get, how it's going to be managed, and lots of questions get asked. And so when we are working with a development partner, we have a series of conditions that need to be in place before they can really start talking to buyers, because we don't want conversations to start which involve the brand unless you've got all the answers.
Your brand again.
Because otherwise you're losing credibility, and the developer doesn't want that either. There's obviously a need to go to market quite quickly, but generally everybody's on board that let's get everything locked down, understood, fully formed before we start the sales process.
We talked about the selection of the projects you'll do. There's the conception and then there's the delivery. But there was also a big piece which is around the activation of those destinations, the creation of the community. How do you do that?
So part of it comes back to design. So again, when we're thinking about those common areas, we want to make sure that they're not secondary. Yes, of course, the units have got to be amazing. And again, they're very sophisticated, discerning, demanding buyers will walk into a show unit or they'll look at a floor plan and go, well, that's not quite right. That should be there. And the proportions of room sizes are wrong or whatever it might be. But the community bit is important to us. So that's about making sure that even your lobby arrival experience feels, you're not looking for hotel scale, but you want it still to feel sumptuous and you want it to feel
grand
and then those spaces which again are going to be driving a sense of, not just a sense, but the physical relationship of people using them together. So whether it be the gyms, the pools, the meeting rooms, the residence lounge, you want to put in those design elements that really help bring that community alive. And then it's about activating that with the team. So again, we have specialists that are focused on managing residential properties. Yes, some of them come out of the hotel space where hospitality is at their hearts and they want to drive that experience. So they will be setting up events, or they'll just, in a way, it's walking into a property and seeing people. You walk in, Adrian, how are you doing? Nice to see you again. You're made to feel home and you're seeing people around you. And it's that Four Seasons welcome and blanket that just gives you that feel of, oh, I really bought into a good place here. I really feel looked after. So many other residential projects you go into, you might see somebody behind a desk in a reception. You might bump into a cleaner or something, but that's it. That's not the way that we do it. So it is, after all, you get the right locations, you get great architecture. It's people that bring it alive. So we always say we're a people business, and that's at the heart of everything we do. And I think that owners that have been with us for years, they really grow to rely on that delivery from Four Seasons. The leaders of the properties that we have are directors of residences, residential GMs and stuff. They are developing relationships with owners that last for decades and maybe passed down through generations. So I think that getting the right people is critical for us, in the same way as a hotel. You've got to have the right leaders in place. And they then are the culture carriers into that property, and they will then imbue the rest of the team with the same service ethic. And for us, it's a very simple thing. You look after that. You just make sure those people are the right ones and then they're nurtured. We also have, within the way that we work, we have a corporate team which obviously has functions based around that initial development phase in the sales and marketing, the space that I'm in. And then we have people who are management and property sort of servicing specialists. And they are constantly bringing together the different property leadership teams. So we have a directors of residence conference. They're learning from each other, what experience that they've got, what did they do that worked really well on that property. Obviously, more things like new protocols and stuff that we want to roll out. There is a constant sort of bringing together of those properties. And again, that's what the brand is doing. And you've got that bench strength from the corporate, which is helping the field the whole time. It works beautifully. And each property kind of thrives on having that support.
And I think that's a really interesting point, because obviously a lot of the people would be talking about the experience and seeing the experience, as you were saying. It's the welcome, it's the activation of the spaces, that creation of community. But it is also an investment and has to be managed as such. I think what's really interesting in what you're saying is that bit of it, which is behind the reception desk, if we were, is also a key component, isn't it?
So when we're doing our initial kind of pitches with developers, and certainly when we're doing the brand onboarding with their teams and the creative agents and the sales agents, certainly, we will spend a lot of time talking about, there's no secret sauce or anything like that. Yeah. It's just that you do all these things because that's what's critical to maintain that ownership experience for the buyers. And so we'll spend a lot of time walking them through that behind the scenes element. And again, it comes back to the design. I mentioned earlier the back of house areas. You've got to have very nicely done back of house so that the staff feel that they're in a nice place. They're proud to work there. So they've got to have the right facilities, breakout areas, cafes, etc. So all of that needs to get built into the design. And then you're going to get good people wanting to work in that building because it becomes a trophy building and they feel pride to work in there. And I think beyond that, then it's really about ensuring that, again, the lessons that we've learned over those 40 years and what's important to buyers, that's brought to the fore in every kind of touch point that a member of staff would have with the owners.
With the owners. I mean, in terms of that sense of activation and community, do you have tech platforms community activation platforms, an app for homeowners as well? Have you gone down that route as
Yeah,
well?
so we have.
Yeah.
We've got an app. We have an app just generally for any guests coming and
Mhm.
using Four Seasons, but we've developed that further for a
For
residential app
Resi,
for our
yeah.
homeowners, and that's got various different added sort of functionality to it. There's an ability, obviously, to go in and just check your
Mm.
HOA documents or the annual accounts, whatever. So that's one element to it. Obviously, you can get
Mm.
services on that. So if you want to go and book something in the spa, if you've got some guests coming in and you want to make the front desk aware, clearly you can just do that. We have a chat function on it, which works brilliantly. And it's very responsive, but it's also humans responding to you. So you feel, again, you can rely on
Yeah.
that functionality. Doesn't replace the human touch.
No,
People will always sort of, hey, how
definitely,
you
yeah.
doing and stuff. But having the ability, just a couple of buttons to check that is important. Plus, that's got a function whereby you can chat with other homeowners for those that have signed up to that. So again, it fosters
Mm.
that sense of community to do that. So you're using tech to back up what you're already putting in place
Mm.
through the building. So yeah, it's important.
How many of the owners do converse with each other, have that sense of community? As you said, if you've been in a building or residence for more than 10 years, you'll obviously know who your neighbors are, especially if there isn't a sort
Yeah,
of churn.
it's very strong.
Mm.
Sometimes you think, oh, you hear about who's buying into the building, oh, they'll be quite private and won't want to do that. But inevitably, when people get in and they get settled, they love that. And they're buying
Mm.
into the building because it is a community. They're buying in because they think they're going to have like-minded people who are going to be in that building. And that's part of the joy of it, I think. It's really not about opening the front door, going through some common areas, going up to your unit, closing the door. It's yes, of course you can do all of that, but you've got these elements which are designed into the program and which are activated by the team to really foster that. So
Mm.
it's a strong part of it, and it's something that it's critical for us to make sure that each building we have delivers on that.
And then sort of on that basis, then I think maybe for yourselves and for the homeowners, if for lack of a better word, how do you measure success? What would be the metrics that you look at? Do you go to the properties and see how they're working once they're developed? How do you measure that success?
Absolutely. There's a constant sort of check-in. Physically, the leaders of the
Mhm.
business will go around the properties, just check in with the directors of residence, often meeting homeowners, just anecdotally having chats with them. How's it all going? But beyond that, we also do homeowner surveys so that we
Mhm.
want to understand what's working well for them, what we could maybe focus a bit more on. So there are constant sort of check-ins and sort of measures to see
Mhm.
how we're doing. Ultimately, the measure, I guess, is if the homeowner association is happy or not.
Yeah, you do.
You're going to hear about
You'd
it
be the
pretty
first to
quickly.
know,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Definitely.
we generally there are annual meetings where they're approving the budgets for the next year, and it's any kind of areas that will come up. That's when they'll raise them. But I suppose the ultimate measure is how many people are selling out of it and moving on.
Yeah,
And if
that's
people
true.
are always going to sell real estate for whatever reasons, they're changing location, circumstances change. But as I said earlier, the rate of turnover is really quite small. That tells you you're doing something right.
Mm. And when there is a resale, the very rare times where there's a resale, how how is that vetted? How is the process vetted? I don't know. It's a bit of a strange
Well, the
question, but
properties, people are buying them as their own property. Yes,
mm,
it's managed by Four Seasons. It comes under the brand, but ultimately it's somebody's property. So no different from any other real estate.
mm,
They will, through a third party agent or whatever, they will agree a sale and that,
okay,
that
and that's how
incoming
it goes
party
through.
comes in. So
Okay.
there's no sort of outright restrictions
Hmm.
or things like that. So it's pretty standard.
And then on the flip coin, so that's for the selling, but in terms of the sort of the rental programs and so on and so forth, how many people, as you said, there's a mixed use of people and why they buy them. Some it's for themselves,
Yeah.
but when there is a rental program, how does that
So
work then?
with the resorts where there's a rental program, so those units, when they're developed, they
Hmm.
have to be developed to be in keeping with the hotel experience, because
Hmm.
ultimately, whilst they're selling to an individual, it's then renting through the hotel as an extension of the hotel
Yeah.
inventory, a special asset class within that hotel inventory, but they're selling as part of that. So all the connectivity and the IT functions that you think that you have in a hotel room, that's got to be repeated through to those homes.
Those
And
residences, yeah.
so qualities of FF&E, furnishings, all the different items that you expect to be in a room when you stay at a
Mm.
hotel, again, those all need to be there. The Four Seasons towels and,
Hmm.
all of those get put through. So I think that's the setup of it is pretty clear, and we're quite
Hmm.
prescriptive about that because we have to deliver
Yep.
that
You have
standard
to
to
deliver the
guests.
standard, yeah.
And it generally works quite well. And people, the one thing I would say is that the people buying into these resort properties, they're still driven really by the fact that they're going to use it themselves for
Hmm.
some of the time. then they will take advantage of there being a rental program where they can generate some revenue. But we don't make any guarantees or promises around that because you can't. And so it would be wrong to take people down. And again, time and again, different properties being advertised with certain guaranteed yields and stuff. And it's just not the way that we would go. It makes it much more of a commercial investment versus a lifestyle purchase of a home.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we see, so that's in transient rental where, hotel guest traffic. In a lot of our properties, people that have bought them in the urban properties in particular, maybe using themselves as a primary residence, maybe they're there on a very ad hoc basis. If they're not planning to be there for a period of time, then they'll probably look to let them out on a longer term basis.
And that would be through you as well?
They tend at the moment to do that through lettings companies who are specialists in that area. They'll typically be on a minimum 12-month basis.
Okay.
Because again, we don't want to have transient guest traffic.
You don't want the Airbnb.
Somebody that's there for 12 months becomes a fixture in that building. So, the homeowners get to know them and they become part of that community. And somebody who is a tenant, long-term tenant of a Four Seasons property has exactly the same rights as the owner using that property. They can go and use all the facilities, they get the services, etc. Yeah.
And in terms of, obviously, your Four Seasons are near to 60 live and kicking projects. What would you say is, for you, in terms of that full journey, that kind of best-in-class benchmark, where you said it was like everything, all the boxes were ticked, it ran super smoothly, and the value generated from start to finish was exceptional. Do you have one?
I think there are a few things that sort of stand out. And I've been with Four Seasons, it's come out for 10 years, so I've seen a few of them now that have come from me from day one right through to finish, which is nice to see that.
Right.
I think that the first standalone property we had in Dubai is if you like, a bit of a poster child for me. It was great partner, so the owner of our 2 hotel properties in Dubai, who has a real understanding of what quality and luxury looks like. He's got a fine sort of attention to detail himself, and just a pleasure to work with. So I think that was great at the start. And then getting involved in that process throughout. And what we did there, and I suppose the lesson is, you look at that Dubai market, and there's a lot of high volume buildings there, and everybody's going after a brand, and you're trying to deliver these sort of incredible projects. His attention was very much about, let's do something which is quite boutique in size. So there's only 28 units in this property, which in the Dubai scale of things is pretty small, but it's exactly the right location in Jumeirah where you'd want to be. The design was beautiful. The interior design from Sybil de Margerie out of Paris was beautiful. And just the quality that was put in place there was exceptional. Again, great amenity program, not oversized, because you've only got 28 units, but just right. But the gym is huge and lovely. They got the bits that would be important for their buyers right. So it's worked incredibly well, and everybody's, I think, very happy with the experience that they've got there. From a commercial standpoint, it worked very well for the developer at the time. It actually sold very, very quickly. Before it really went into sort of proper open market, it just sold. And there have been 1 or 2 resales in there because the Dubai market's just gone like that. It's the price increases have been phenomenal. Some people are clearly going to take advantage of that. But again, most people have stayed within the building. So I think being across all of that detail through that project was,
through the life cycle and everything,
was great to see. So that was good as a kind of something that's worked really well. I think that, again, one of the first projects I worked on when I was still at Knight Frank was the Madrid project, as I mentioned. And so seeing that then come out, and that was a lesson in which you could see the pricing expectations that we were looking for there were completely out of kilter with the Madrid market. And this was a location which was a non-traditional residential area. And Canalejas is very commercial, but beautiful property with the hotel, and then just 22 residential units sitting on top floors. And again, design beautifully done. The amenity program is more obviously shared with the hotel because it's fully integrated. But they got easily a 50% premium against the market, even though it was in a not such a good neighborhood. And again, it had a good traction of sales pace. So again, it showed that the brand can do something in those markets. And the other one that always took me by surprise, and I refer to quite a lot, is the residential project we have as part of a mixed-use hotel in Kyoto. Okay. And when we first started looking at that, again, with a development partner that owns now multiple properties with us, great partner. When I was first looking at that, they were talking about the pricing aspirations they had, which were up here. And I looked at the market, and the best that I could see was the market's here. So there's no way, I'm sorry, but you're barking. Sure enough, goes to market, and they achieve that.
And they achieve that.
Yeah. And it was about a lesson that you don't know all markets. You can be expert
You can still
across
be
quite a few,
surprised.
but you can be surprised.
Yeah.
And Kyoto is just one of those gems as a location that people just, the right people attach such importance and value to it. Plus, there was nothing really like us in that market at the
In that
time.
market.
So you were producing something that was very different from anything else that was there. So it wasn't right to benchmark it against other real estate. So again, it's taught me that there are lots of markets that are very mature: London, New York, Miami, Dubai, where there's plenty of other kind of direct things that you're going to look as your comp set. It doesn't need to be that for you to still be successful in a market. You can generally raise the bar quite aggressively.
And be the first to market in that sense.
And be the first to market, yeah. And I would say that we're quite pioneering in many ways. And there probably are a number of locations that we're in, both in mature destinations. The US have probably got some cities we're in which people might be surprised that we're in. But we've done incredibly well with projects there. But people have understood that value proposition of Four Seasons, and they're prepared to pay healthy prices. You pay for what you get, what you pay for. So you have to, again, back to what I was saying earlier. You got to fulfill on the promise. You've got to deliver it. But if you do that, then people feel good that they've made, even at top price, they've made a good investment.
I just want to circle back to something that you said before, because I think that's a really interesting point about that sort of, in terms of the people you'll be selling to, was it 80% are going to be the top of that market? That's quite an interesting stat, because you would have thought that if someone is from the location, you have a better knowledge of the location, you have standalone properties that you could go for. How do you think? Why is that?
I think that it's not 80%
no, of course,
everywhere.
Yeah.
You get certain markets where it is genuinely very international, and you're going to get a myriad of different nationalities buying into it. But I think in many cases, the low-hanging fruit really is the top end of the local market, because people might have their primary residence, but they still want to have, and they can afford to have, the best new thing in that market. And again, the brand brings that cachet. It's something that you want to have. It's a trophy asset for you. Even if you're then going to be, as we were saying, leasing it out and not using it yourself, people still want to have ownership of that trophy asset. So I think it's always easier to find those people in that market already than to bring them from somewhere else. To buy real estate in a certain location, if you're not there, there's a reason for you to buy it. So either you see a great opportunity and you think the market's going to go like that, or you are going there frequently on work, or you've got leisure interest. You've got a relationship with the place. So, and of course, there are plenty of international buyers and that you will find that do that. But those people that are in that market generally are probably the easiest ones to get first. And if you're buying into a Four Seasons property, generally you're going to be using it quite a bit of the time yourself. So they're already in that market. It makes sense.
So obviously there's a huge amount of brand touch points which bring this quality. What would you say are the core defining pillars or elements behind the Four Seasons brand that really set you aside from what is a hugely competitive market?
I do believe that we pay probably closer attention to that initial design phase than most other brands. So we, in a way, can be quite ball aching for the developers because we're going to hold them to account on what we want. And so we have our design standards, and those are there for a reason. That we want to make sure we're delivering best-in-class real estate under our name. And so I think that attention to detail at the outset is one thing. And then I think it comes back to the property management and the quality of the people that we're putting in place. And that long-term experience that is promised when you buy with Four Seasons is absolutely fundamental to us. And if we lose that at any point, then that's when the brand is eroded, in the residential space at least. So I think that getting those two things right. And so we will be, as I say, like stuck records when it comes to sort of working with developers, saying these are the things that we're focused on. The property management's the key thing. And but as I said, it's the layer cake of stuff. So it's a whole series of different things. But I would say that those are the two kind of pillars for us. Just make sure we get the product right and we get the right people in there, then the magic works.
In such a buoyant market as you've seen at the moment, of branded residences, do you think there are any sort of myths that you'd like to bust, or the false truths that are out there?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think everybody's jumping to percentage premiums that they're getting. And I know for sure, looking around at a lot of projects, people are claiming premiums when they've just got asking prices which have been put out to the market. They don't have any traction of sales, or the sales are incredibly slow. So that's not, you can say you're asking prices here, but actually you're not achieving that through sales, or you're achieving sales at a lower price. That's not where you are. And
It's not
so
metric,
I think it's that becomes a bit of a falsehood. And then I think people are going to start to be quite discerning about what the long-term ownership experience is for them. And I do think that what brands bring to a project is different, and that's fine. And people will have an affinity to certain brands, and that's all right and proper. But I think a lot of it is about creating a sort of a distinction in the marketplace. Long-term maintenance and management of an asset, I don't understand how many other brands are getting into that space and how they're looking after that, because I just don't think they are. So I think
maybe not even looking at it, or it's not even on the radar. Yeah. And obviously, as we said, closing question. You still feel that there's a lot of value to be generated? You're still very buoyant and excited about the future for Four Seasons in this space?
Hugely, yeah. I think we see, as I say, both in the mixed use sort of area, plus particularly in standalone, we think that we've just started to scratch the surface of that, really. And in the standalone space, we see opportunity both in sort of city centers and also in larger kind of out of town communities. So again, depends what market you're in. But you think about some of the European cities that we want to be in, where we've got hotels, but maybe we don't have a residential footprint yet. We want to be in those spaces, but again, we've got to be in the right locations, and we've got to be in landmark buildings. There might be heritage buildings which are being redeveloped. Finding the right scale of those is a bit of a challenge. So you're tending to see smaller boutique offerings, and again, we can make that work. But there's great opportunity also with larger developments, say 125 to 200 units, community out of town, which inevitably have a different program of amenities. So they'll probably need to have more of an F&B offering, because you don't have that immediately around you. So that changes the whole strategy around how you make those communities work. But we see great opportunity there. And again, I think you look about different sort of regions that we're in. We have a huge amount going on in the Middle East, as I say, and I think that that's great, and we'll continue to develop through that market quite aggressively. I think in Asia Pacific, there is a lot of scope for us to push further. I think in a lot of the Asian markets, sort of developers are creating their own brands a little bit. And so you're almost competing to try to get into the space that they feel they want to get into already. So again, you got to make the proposition clear as to what it is. And in those cases, you're probably saying as a brand, yes, we can deliver a broader international buyer base for you, because otherwise they can just go after the local market themselves.
And they can do it themselves, yeah.
So I think that it takes a little bit more to unlock some of those opportunities.
And in good old Europe?
Yeah, for sure. Again, I think that we have seen very strong development pipeline in resorts, with obviously hotel core and then residential dotted around. The challenges in the cities, as I mentioned, is finding sufficient scale in the right property. Often the hotels that we're opening through those European sort of cities are conversions of existing assets, which don't necessarily come with development for residential. It takes a little bit more to find those that will work, but we're very actively pursuing those. So again, as I mentioned, we've got a very clear strategic view as to the markets that we want to be in. And we're firmly focused on getting into those. So I think huge opportunity in the Americas still. Again, I come back to that. People think that is a market which, well, it is a market which has got a lot of branded sort of profile to it already, but there's, again, significant opportunity. And I think that we feel, Adrian, it's not just about going and finding new locations that we're not already in, but we can have multiple properties in different key cities. If we feel that city has the scope for that, we're happy to do second, third.
No, so that's hugely exciting. It's good to, as we all
enough
know,
to keep you busy for a little bit longer.
A little bit longer, definitely. And I think it's really good to see that there is an asset class that's thriving, but also that what you've mentioned, there's some core fundamentals around the brand, the operation of a property, which are very much service-led, very much human-led, which are still core to creating value and generating value for the long term.
Absolutely. And I think that we are, as I say, very excited by the next phase of growth. We as a business have set up residential as a kind of key growth area for us. We've invested further into the team. We have a new group head of residential, a guy called Chris Meredith, who's based in Miami. Chris has come on board middle of last year and really taking it forward for us now. So I think we're very energized by the whole thing, and we feel it's great. And look, the branded sector becoming busier with many others, that's great. I mean, it's sort of, it shows that the proposition is out there and people understand it. But I think that what we're going to be focusing on is sticking to those key
Core values.
tenets, if you like, getting the right location, getting the right architecture, getting a developer who sort of shares the vision, and delivering that service and management. So if we keep doing those things right, I think we'll be well placed.
Perfect. Being meticulous pays then.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, James, thanks ever so much for coming on the
Thank you,
podcast.
Aidan.
It's hugely insightful. Yeah. I hope everyone will enjoy the episode as I did. So.
Well, I really enjoyed chatting to you. Thank you. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks, James.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Bricks and More. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a colleague or friend who would appreciate it. If you're not already, connect with me on LinkedIn, whether to say hello or discuss a destination, real estate, or hospitality project of your own. Finally, please rate the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, share the episode, connect with me on LinkedIn, and rate the podcast. I'm Adrian Strittmatter, and I'll be back soon with the next episode.